I work as a psychiatrist in a large University of Toronto teaching hospital and a regional cancer centre. I'm going to share with you what I've learned about some of the coping styles of secular and religious people in the context of cancer. And I'm going to make a case for secular humanist chaplaincy to be provided by the religious chaplains themselves. When people receive a diagnosis of cancer, they typically experience profound shock, followed by feelings of helplessness in the face of the tremendous existential threat and anxiety. A little later, as they reorient themselves, they might take stock of value and purpose in their lives. They may reappraise their life priorities. Very commonly, people wonder, why me? Secular-minded people might ask, did I neglect my health? Religiously oriented people might ponder, is there an intended reason or lesson? The most common indication for a referral to a psychiatrist like myself is anxiety or depression causing significant, sustained impairment in functioning. There are other professional resources for people who are less psychiatrically impaired, where the issues are more general and expectable. These professionals include psychologists, social workers, and chaplains, if the patient asks. Note that counselling, which is provided by all these professionals, is more than just having someone to talk to, though let me tell you that too is valuable and scarce. I'd like to tell you about a patient who was referred to me, whom I will call Ms. C. The oncology team found Ms. C to be difficult. She is a middle-aged woman who was undergoing breast cancer treatment. Her prognosis was actually very favorable, but like all cancer diagnoses, the prognosis was uncertain. She was having tremendous emotional difficulty coping. The oncology team found her difficult because she had endless lists of questions and requests for individualized accommodations and was constantly argumentative with everyone. As well, she repeatedly expressed suicidal thoughts. When I met Ms. C, she was well physically, despite her cancer diagnosis, but she was highly anxious. She was particularly anxious about issues of control. She feared any loss of control, especially in the potential, though unlikely, event of a decline in her functioning if her cancer was to progress. She understood that her prognosis was favorable, but she had great difficulty tolerating any uncertainty or imprecision. She had an intense need for control. It became clear to me in the course of my interview with her that this was a case of primarily of anxiety, much more so than depression. And her anxiety seemed to be an amplification of her lifelong traits. She was by nature anxious, obsessive, and perfectionistic. None of this was of psychiatric proportions, presently, recently, or in the past, but it had hindered her a lot in her life. I found Ms. C to be very intelligent, hyper-rational, but her judgment was impaired by her anxiety. She was pursuing an academic career in a high-end scientific field. She had been indecisive and inefficient in her work. She'd been very delayed in obtaining her PhD. Opportunities had been narrowed throughout her career and indeed her life in general by her perfectionistic indecisiveness and this excessive need for control and certainty, perfection. She'd been avoidant of committed long-term relationships. She didn't want children. All of this due to her fear of relinquishing control. Ms. C did not actually wish to die. She was afraid to die. Suicide for her represented a fantasy of the ultimate assertion of control. The idea both terrified and consoled her. Note, this was not a case of the right to die, as we've been discussing in other contexts at this symposium. Her biggest risk was the possibility that she might undermine her treatment, very real possibility. She might undermine her treatment due to her indecisiveness because of her obsessing and fixating. Ms. C stated to me, "Oh, I wish I was a religious person because then I would have someone to blame. If there's a God, he's against me." She was frustrated by the uncertainties of oncology, much more accustomed to the precision of physics, her field. Her entire experience of cancer treatment felt utterly meaningless to her and frustrating, including all of her interactions with the many people trying so hard to help her. She couldn't view any of these events as anything other than a total derailment of her life's purpose, her career. Well, some people have a stronger need for and expectation of control. This is part of a personality trait, a constitutional trait, really, generally referred to in the psychological literature as conscientiousness. Such people, we're among them, these are our people, are focused, organized, attentive to detail, careful, responsible, persistent, highly motivated. These people are always in the driver's seat of their life. They're go-getters. They have a high capacity for self-control and willpower. This trait is present at a young age, as demonstrated by the famous marshmallow test in preschoolers. It is generally an advantageous trait, but too much of it, and you're a perfectionist in a bad way, compulsive, rigid, controlling, demanding, judgmental, and self-critical. At the opposite end of the spectrum, are people who have a lower capacity for self-control and a concomitantly lower expectation of control. They're passive. They go through life in the passenger seat of their life. They go with the flow. They're laid back. This may be a disadvantageous trait in many situations in the context of our very demanding and highly structured society. However, these people are flexible, adaptive, spontaneous. They have lower levels of stress and anxiety. They're easygoing. I'm on the high end of the conscientiousness scale with a higher inclination to need to feel in control. And my wife, Karen, is towards the opposite end of this bell curve. I notice the lint on the carpet. She trips over the boots that she just strewed all over the hall. She doesn't even notice them. In 2005, Karen was diagnosed with aggressive, fairly extensive, but non-metastatic breast cancer. I swung into full, intense control mode to get access to the help that we needed. When we got in to see the experts in my own hospital, I felt like my house was on fire, and there I was on the front lawn holding a garden hose, and 5 gleaming bright red fire trucks had just come screaming with their sirens down the road. A whole lot of firefighters had leapt out. The fire chief had gently but firmly shoved me out of the way and said, "Sir, you can step back now." The oncologist told me not to check test results on our electronic medical records system and not to Google anything about diagnosis, treatment, or prognosis. I felt relief, but anxious not to be in control. Taking my cue from Karen, we both came to accept our lack of control over the causes and outcome of her cancer. We simply showed up for treatment and hoped for the best. Here's a picture of our family, taken less than a week after the diagnosis. We thought it might be important to have a family portrait. We were still undergoing tests looking for metastases. I'm looking rather pale and stressed out there. Karen outwardly was more calm. Our twin girls were 7, our son was 3. I didn't think he would remember her if she died at that age. And here we are 8 months later, shortly after Karen completed most of her treatment. How did we cope? Well, for one thing, we simply accepted randomness and probability statistics. Our worldview was, still is, shit happens. We could not buy into reassurances, oh, there were many, that everything would be all right, nor reassurances that everything happens for a reason. We heard that a lot as well. We understood that things might turn out very badly, and that we do not have a privileged fate. We politely declined to participate in any religious rituals or prayers, but we graciously thanked our religious family and friends for their caring. We focused on living life, simply living life as fully and as meaningfully as was possible, here and now, with a sense of urgency and priority, and boy, life is short was not a cliche at that time. We focused on our relationship, our parenting. The children kept us focused, they were our priority. Our connections to extended family and friends, which were very important to us. A lot of the time we were focused on practical needs, work, especially for me, and we had a lot of vacations trying to create memories. We recognized that most of our most moving and meaningful interactions with people occurred during our time of crisis. We were the grateful beneficiaries of very much kindness and caring. We had a strong sense of purpose and life clarity, and perhaps especially when we expected a poor prognosis and a foreshortened future together. Our motto was, don't sweat the small stuff. But let me tell you something, human nature relapses far more surely than does cancer, and very rapidly. Irreverent humor helps too, a lesson I learned from Karen. Here's the t-shirt she bought a few weeks after her diagnosis. We've had some very severe scares over the years. Most recently, a mere 3.5 weeks ago, Karen found a new lump on her mastectomy scar. This was very stressful. While waiting for her tests, here's what she texted my kids. Borat is the embodiment of offensive and irreverent humor, and that's Karen's sense of humor. And here's the text she sent to the kids and to me when the recent test results established that the new lump was just inflammation. As a result of our experience of cancer, I became interested in how other people cope with cancer, especially the terminally ill. I also wanted an opportunity to give back. So I became a consultant to the Cancer Centre of our hospital 5 years ago. How do people cope? So following are some of my observations regarding how people cope with cancer. Important factors that affect coping include, but are not limited to, personality differences, especially, but not only, the high versus low control dimension of personality, and worldview differences, especially, but not only, the religious versus secular worldview differences. People diagnosed with cancer frequently ask, did I cause my cancer? People with a high need for control, whether religious or secular, tend to have exaggerated and misplaced feelings of personal responsibility for their cancer. Did I deserve this? Sin? Lifestyle? Can I influence it? Patients commonly overestimate the role of their own actions and lifestyles in the causation of their cancer, and in their ability to prevent it coming back. Most people do not like the idea that randomness rules our lives. There are dangers in trying too hard to feel in control. People obsessed with control often need help in prioritizing just living their lives here and now, because too much control can become a seriously destructive distraction from relationships and other meaningful aspects of one's life, including diet and exercise for the secular. Some people even get anxious about being anxious. There's so much hype about mind-body connection and holism, and I say this as a psychiatrist, that people are so afraid that if they're stressed, they'll affect those cancer cells and how likely they are to divide out of control and not respond to chemotherapy. In my observations, the following coping styles emerge as a result of the intersection of worldview and personality type. I'll let you read this for just a few moments. Well-described cognitive biases, such as the hindsight bias, underpin some of the assumptions that give rise to many common beliefs. Existential concerns about purpose and meaning are typically heightened greatly when people are dealing with potentially life-threatening illnesses. Religious people seek the purpose of their life. The assumption is that the universe and life are intentionally created and designed, events are intended, and their task is to understand the intention behind it all. This can lead to comfort for many, but it's a double-edged sword. Anguish for others, why me? Secular people make purposes for their lives. I don't have to tell this audience. Commonly, people want to make a positive impact on their personal world. For both secular and religious people, there are many common sources of life satisfaction and meaning. I'll let you read that. Just to emphasize one thing, there's a trap for secularists in overemphasizing accomplishments in life as a source of meaning and satisfaction. We all fail. We're all disappointed with ourselves. Right? You know that expression, my goal in life is to be the person my dog thinks I am. So there's a lot of self-acceptance required. That's part of meaning as well. Fundamentally, people just want to know that they matter and that their life has had an effect on the lives of others and that others care about them. But mattering to whom or to what? Religious people want the universe to care. I wish them luck. Secular people just want people to care. People generally want to know that their life matters to others, and people often want to know that something good might come out of something bad, perhaps some positive impact on others. This is even more so in terminal illness. Psychotherapeutic work often emphasizes this. What about people who feel that their lives and deaths won't matter? What about people whose lives, by anyone's reckoning, really have been very disappointing, whether by circumstances or, unfortunately, sometimes, quite often, their own doing? So even the most isolated, estranged person in the most tragic of circumstances, or with profound feelings of failure, can be told that they matter, at least, at a minimum, to their professional caregivers. Patients can be affirmed as a source of profound learning, which will have a significant rippling effect on others, transmitted through the caregiver or the therapist. As a therapist, I emphasize the personal impact on me the patient is having. I express gratitude to my patients for sharing their life experience with me, for teaching me profound lessons about the human condition. And this affirmation may be as comforting as the reassurance that their physical needs will be taken care of in their terminal illness. At this point, I'd like to discuss a role for secular humanist chaplaincy. The goal would be to provide the same kind of supportive counseling that chaplains provide very well, actually, but for non-believers. To listen to, talk with, and comfort patients who don't necessarily need to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a social worker even. Some patients are socially isolated. Most simply can't talk with their family and friends about how they really feel. In my experience of reaching out as a secular humanist to religious chaplains in Toronto and Canada, unlike what we've been hearing about this morning and last night, I found the chaplains in my part of the world to be very receptive, open, interested, motivated. Well, they also are under pressure to demonstrate their ongoing relevance in an era of hospital budget cuts and regulation of psychotherapists. And they operate in very secular organizations in my part of the world and in a multicultural society. They're typically compassionate people, empathic people, reflective. Their organization in Canada has actually moved from being Christian-oriented pastoral care to trying very hard to emphasize multiculturalism, serving all religions. And so serving non-believers is the next logical step, and that's the point I've been making to them. I haven't encountered very much resistance. Most non-believers, though, would not consider asking to see a chaplain. Making the chaplain's work amenable to those patients might be partly a matter of emphasizing aspects of what the chaplains are already doing. They need to rebrand, they need to market themselves in ways that will appeal to and feel accessible to non-religious people. So I'm trying to persuade them, the chaplains, that they're actually good at doing this, at providing meaning-centered counseling without the God talk. Their ability to do so will also require understanding more fully and more deeply the non-believer's worldview and framework for meaning-making. It does entail acquiring a deeper, more subtle understanding and appreciation of the secular humanist naturalistic perspective. Here's an example of an attempt in my hospital by the chaplains themselves, after all these discussions that we'd had, at rebranding. Here's what they drafted. I'll let you read that. This is what they were going to put on an information pamphlet. It's a work in progress. Okay. Chaplaincy training emphasizes viewing the individual life as a living human document, a narrative in process. Just like other professional counselors, counseling by chaplains involves active listening, empathy, attention, insightful reflection, monitoring one's own emotional response, and an emphasis on the therapeutic relationships. And explorations of purpose and meaning are especially central in chaplaincy counseling. So what about our patient, Ms. C? Could the chaplains have helped her? And I'm going to rush through the next 3 slides about Ms. C just to get to the next ones in the interest of time. But the point I wanted to make is that I chose a tough case to describe to you. Most patients are actually a lot easier and, to deal with and very grateful to have anyone to talk with. But the point about Ms. C was that she needed help in rethinking her life narrative, what was going on in her life. Instead of just seeing cancer as a derailment and everything as an obstacle and needing to get back on track, she could have found and made a lot of meaning in this process. And it could have actually been life-changing in some important ways for her. I'm not suggesting for a moment that you should all want to have cancer. It's a good thing, and we should be so happy we had cancer. But when shit happens, you can make meaning from it in at least small but important ways. And sorry again, that got reformatted slightly. Okay. All right. So there's value in empathic, active listening. I've already made this point that most patients are easier to deal with and are very grateful. And when they've confided in a chaplain or any counselor, a lot of them say that that's the most meaningful conversation they've ever had. So finally, a little more about what we've been doing in Toronto and at a national level in Canada. So I've been working, as I said, with the local chaplains in my hospital. It's a very large teaching hospital and regional cancer center. Turns out there's one chaplain there who's actually a secular humanist. She'd been trying to introduce a shift for quite a while, but it had been difficult for her. Mostly they're very liberal-minded, but still very much theistic chaplains. I met with the president of the Canadian Association for Spiritual Care, who happens to also be in Toronto, and at his suggestion applied to present a workshop next week, as it happens, in Hamilton, Ontario, at the Chaplains National Association annual meeting. I'll be talking, presenting a similar presentation to this with a different emphasis. I was also invited to participate as a committee member in the external review of the chaplaincy training program at my hospital. That's the group of us at the accreditation a couple months ago. The external reviewers were actually very impressed and enthusiastic about this proposal to broaden the chaplaincy to serve non-believers. And here are some quotes from their report. Quote, "There were 3 exhilarating meetings over the last 2 days, which consisted of a group of interprofessional colleagues, one of whom is myself, who hold key roles at Sunnybrook." And this wasn't only about me and my proposal. There was a lot of good stuff here, but they were especially excited about this proposal. "The recognition of the value that we chaplains have to offer to many people in terms of spiritual care competencies and practice to those who are non-religious and atheist was a new discovery, a revelation for some of the committee members. I'm also going to be teaching the chaplains myself next academic year on how to understand and work psychotherapeutically with non-believers. And finally, this initiative also has the potential to help clergy see new roles for themselves in an increasingly secular society. I see it as an application of Dan Dennett and Linda Lascola's clergy project, in a sense. It's worth noting that people are much more likely to shift their worldviews when they feel that they themselves are a central, active, capable, respected agent in the process of change, maybe even seeing themselves as leading that change. It's all about control again. I think this just may be more effective as a strategy of changing minds than simply trying to generate cognitive dissonance through rational argumentation, because that can push people in either direction. I think that we'd be well advised to allow the chaplains to teach us, secular humanists, ways of helping suffering people to make meaning without the God talk, rather than us trying to convince them philosophically of the viability and validity of this worldview. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Thanks for sharing your personal family. It's really moving.